All right. Well, thank you all for registering and for take a 360-degree view of your donors with an omni-channel approach with speakers Richard Geiger from Data Axle and Kimberly O'Donnell from Bonterra. We're delighted to have you all here. For those who don't know me, I'm Jeanette, the marketing manager for Data Axle, and I'm the moderator for this webinar. For those who have registered but have to leave early, don't worry, we'll be sending the recording out. We do have a few poll questions, a few in the beginning and a few at the end, so please be ready to answer. Your answers will be anonymous. If you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box located on the Zoom toolbar, and we'll do our best to answer them during the presentation. If we don't, we have dedicated time at the end of the presentation specifically for Q&A. So now I'll be handing it off to Kimberly O'Donnell, Chief Fundraising and Engagement Officer at Bonterra.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. It's great to be talking with you today about omni-channel communications. Really excited to be chatting with Richard about this, and hopefully you'll walk away with some very tangible ideas on how you can take a stronger, more meaningful approach to communicating with your supporters through omni-channel communications. Now, as we get started, I would love to get to know some of you a little better. So I don't know if you guys want to just, I guess, in the Q&A, drop in your name and the organization that you're from so we can say hi to you, because as I'm looking down the number of attendees, and we've got a great audience here today, I just want to give a shout out to Angela and Austin and Cynthia, David, and we have Deshaw and Grace and Heidi and Melissa. There's tons of folks on here, but let's share a little bit and say hi to each other. Xavier is from the Environmental Defense Fund. We've got Earthshare Texas represented. So, thanks to all of you. I am Kimberly O'Donnell. I am the Chief Fundraising Engagement Officer at Bonterra. I've been in the nonprofit sector, both on the tech and the practitioner fundraising side for about 25 years, and I love it. So you're going to find me just chatting it up today, wanting to share some very practical ideas and also challenging you, because I'm also a life and an executive coach. So sometimes I put it out there where I go, now, why aren't you doing this? And what should you be thinking? And here's the question you can ask yourself. So that's why I like to push your buttons just a little bit as we go, so that you can think about how to make this more impactful at your organization. I come to you from Bonterra. Bonterra is a new organization. We are a leader in social good technology, and our focus is to amplify the work of those who help our world. That would be all of you, by bringing together the people, the technology, the ideas, and the insights that can really drive good in the world. Bonterra has united 4 companies: Cyber Grants, Every Action, Network for Good, and Social Solutions, as well as their respective entities, to create what we call a landscape-defining software platform that's meant to disrupt the social good industry. And now I'm going to pass things over to my partner here today, Richard.
All right, well, thank you, Kimberly. Let's get my thing going here. So hello, Emily in Las Vegas. I saw your name on the list even before you chatted, so that was good. I'm Richard Geiger. I've been in the industry for 25, 30 years, both on the client side and on the vendor side, doing work around fundraising management consulting, business process, and technology. I'm excited to see a lot of my friends on the webinar today. So it's good that you're here, and we really are going to ask that you ask a lot of questions and sort of engage as best as you can. One of the things that we want to make sure that you get out of today's talk is a little bit on, are you ready for Giving Tuesday? Are you ready for year end in those omni-channel kind of experiences? And number 2, how are you going to engage those folks as part of your cleanup strategy in January, right? Because it doesn't end, right? For those of you that don't know anything about Data Axle, we are specifically compilers of data specifically for your omni-channel audiences. And just to give you a few stats, right? We have more than 2 billion donor transactions in our donor cooperative data sets. We have data from 175 million households, and we have more than 1 billion email addresses. So we really are working hard to help you reach folks in mail, phone, email, social, peer-to-peer, in person. So finding your audiences, meeting them where they want to be, and giving them the information that they're interested in. So let's get started. Kimberly.
Yes. So let's talk a little bit about the current state of fundraising. It's something we all know, but I always feel like it's a great place to level set as we dive into what you can do to improve some of the fundraising and engagement that you're doing with your supporters. So on the next slide, as we look at this, individual giving totaled 67% of total generosity in 2021. And that number has been going down a little over time. And what we know about giving is that it typically follows the market during a recession, and then we see that through the Giving USA annual data. Donations typically track with the economy, and they lag about 3 to 9 months behind. So what's happening with the economy often tracks with it. Now, what we also know is that people are extremely generous, right? And one exception to this experience of giving following the economy was during COVID, when we saw an increase in giving due to the pandemic and due to the social justice movement. So we know donors are out there. We know that they want to give. We know that they see a need during recession to support organizations, because a lot of them have increased need, definitely direct service providers during downtimes. So then the question becomes, how can we reach these donors where they're at in very meaningful ways? And that's where the omni-channel approach really comes into play. And as we think about this, the question is, are digital channels the future of giving? And just some thoughts around this as we look at it. Online giving is continuing to grow year over year. And in big ways, we are seeing that people are increasingly online, and not just young people. Young people are definitely there, but of all generations, they've moved online, and they're digesting a lot more information online on a daily basis. And when you look at millennials, they're giving through social media, 37%, as noted here. 50% of Gen Z. As we think about millennials, and you may go, well, we don't have a lot of millennial donors right now. To think about them and the lifetime value of that relationship with them. Millennials are set to, there are 75 million of them, and they're going to be inheriting between $15 to $35 trillion during that transfer of wealth. Richard, what else do you want to add in here?
Well, I think the only other interesting thing to really think about here is millennials, Gen Z folks, they're discovering your cause through social media, and social media is typically what clients come to us and say, how do I know if they're on Twitter? How do I know if they're on Facebook? How do I know what they're seeing online? And so one of the questions and one of the things that you want to think about, right, is as you plan on looking at your omni-channel experience and sort of meeting the donors where they are, is how do you engage Twitter data, Instagram data, Facebook data, and bring it into your CRM and actually make it useful? So we're gonna talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, and as we level set with that, just before we hop into this poll, I just want to share, I just learned this data this morning, that on average, people are spending about 2 hours and 27 minutes in, looking at social media. And it's a 2-minute increase over last year, which was the highest year ever recorded, highest level ever recorded. So we know people are consuming more and more social media. So to keep that in mind as we continue this discussion today. But now let's take a poll. We want to level set a bit and just ask our crowd, how many of you know the difference between multi-channel and omni-channel communications and engagement?
All
And
right.
it's
I've
okay
never,
if you say no.
it is, and I've never been on a panel and it says I can't vote. So I always like to be the ringer and say at least one person will vote, and they won't let me, Kimberly. So we'll see.
So please answer. Don't be shy. We will define it for you shortly if you're unsure. And hey, that's also why you came to this webinar today. It's to learn a little bit more about multi-channel and omnichannel.
All right. Jeanette, how do our results look?
Yeah, so I just ended it and 59 people answered, and we have a 37% that said yes, 34% that said no, and 29% that said unsure.
Okay.
It's pretty split.
Okay, so the next poll question is,
Have you utilized omnichannel before? Just take another second or two.
Okay, I'm ready to share the results.
go for it.
All right, great. So we have 20% that answered yes, 59% that answered no, and 21% that answered unsure.
Cool. So interesting enough, when we're out in the field and we're talking with nonprofits, there's typically a lot of roadblocks to deploying what an omni-channel strategy is, right? And so we sort of bucket them into like these top three categories. So number one is budget constraints. When I started out in fundraising, direct mail was so great and so easy, right? And I could say, here's my audience, here are my costs, here's my history, here's what's going to come out on the other end in terms of my net, right? And I knew, and my predictability around fundraising was exceptionally easy and exceptionally predictable, right? Because you understood the hard costs and you also understood the metrics around that, right? And then, we added email, sometimes we took telemarketing in there, and again, pretty easy to measure, right? So budget constraints are really hard because when we actually go to an omni-channel strategy, we don't know what metrics and how to associate costs. So we're going to talk about that for a few minutes. The second thing is that, that makes omni-channel a little bit more difficult is competing priorities, right? Back in the day when we started with direct mail and then added email, we took direct mail strategies and we put them onto email programs. And that didn't really work out very well. And now we've got multiple platforms, multiple sets of strategies, and we've got one set of content. And what we find when we do testing, right? Content for the mail versus content that we do in email versus content that we do on social versus content that we do in social advertising. Good, but needs to be presented in multiple different ways based upon what the platform is. So the question is how do you budget for and how do you decide where you actually adapt your content for which platforms? And then the last one is, time, right? If one campaign took X number of hours and now you have to add multiple channels to that campaign, do you have the resources and the specialties on there to figure it out? Kimberly, is there anything else that I'm sort of missing on those top three?
I mean, I think you hit it right on the head there. Those are the big roadblocks. And then there's the other things, right? Which is change. Change is just really hard in an organization. And being able to get buy-in from leadership can be really challenging, especially if it is a new budget item. But here's the bottom line. We can't afford to not meet our supporters where they're at. And our, traditional methods of doing fundraising don't work for the next generation and all of our different stakeholders. And so we really have to continue to test and learn and really open our organization to what's next, as opposed to what is I want to say traditional, but really what is trusted in that organization. We're going to step out of our comfort zone. And so as a coach, I would ask you, what is holding you back from really developing and testing the waters in an omni-channel campaign strategy?
Okay. So we're going to take the next few minutes to really define and talk about multi-channel versus omni-channel. And I think today in this space, people use the terms interchangeably. And I think that's okay. But sometimes when we engage and we talk about things, multi-channel means one thing and omni-channel means something different in terms of implementing a strategy. So for sake of definition, this is really easy. Multi-channel equals follow the channel. Omni-channel really equals follow the audience. Okay, so old school multi-channel would look something like this on the left, right? It would be aligning maybe your email, your direct mail, and your social, and launching those 3 campaigns at the same time. What would make that shift from multi-channel to omni-channel would be, what audiences are you actually launching those campaigns to? Are you looking at an audience that is the same or different for those 3 vehicles or those 3 channels? Or are you looking at one audience that may have tentacles in each of those channels and feeding off of one another, right? And that goes back to Kimberly's point of identifying who your audience is, understanding the testing components associated with it, and then going from there and identifying, how much of your strategy is, I'm going to send out 10 gazillion emails and see what happens, and how much is it, I've got an audience that's digitally responsive and I'm going to look at them first. Okay. One of the things that we typically talk about when we think about the difference between omni-channel and multi-channel is that there are some really specific benefits to implementing an omni-channel campaign. And the first one is really important. It centers around the donor experience. Now, what's really interesting here, Kimberly, is that doesn't sound new and groundbreaking to me. We're always into the donor experience. But what's interesting is, is old school says, we understand at an organization what the constituent is doing to us. They've responded to this mail piece. They signed up for this petition. They asked for this newsletter. They called in for support. And we've got these beautiful CRM systems that say all the things that they're doing to us, but we don't necessarily understand what the constituent is doing outside of our organization. So the question in omni-channel is, is in that donor experience is creating a donor experience based on the internal and the external, right? The second piece is that typically omni-channel strategies and campaigns are much more efficient. What we know, and my guess of the 100 people who are on this call, the last 2 years, paper has become very expensive. The post office has become very expensive.
And unreliable.
And unreliable. And even when we can get our best acquisitions package or our best renewal package with 12 colors and all sorts of different things, it's really expensive. So the question is why is it more efficient? Well, if you're going through your omni-channel campaign, don't send your most expensive package to everybody and see where it sticks. Send it to the people who need that for the response and support it with the other channels. Or look the other way around and say, you know what? I'm going to try to find Richard on email first. And if he responds to email, maybe I don't have to send him that package, right? And I can save some money on those pieces, right? And then the third piece is, there's a bunch of studies out there that say an omni-channel experience or an omni-channel strategy, there's a higher return on investment. Now, here's the real challenge here. I'm going to raise my hand as a fundraiser. I love cost per dollar raised because that is what gets me more budget. Well, big challenge with Omnichannel is that we have some new metrics. We go to our chief marketing officers and we say, can you help me, put some dollars next to return on ad spend, and how did that relate to the money that I've raised? And so creating that idea of what a successful omnichannel strategy looks like doesn't only relate on the dollars raised, it also relates to other components to the campaign. Kimberly, anything else on that we should add?
No, you've got it. You've got it. Let's
Okay.
keep rolling.
So the question is, right, to do an omnichannel strategy, you actually need data that relates to multiple channels. And so the question is like, where do you start and where do you figure this out? So I always like to start with like really the basics. And so old school, my very first job in a nonprofit, I was the business analyst, and they said, Richard, we are going to do a plain giving mailing. I am sure nobody on this call has ever done a plain giving mailing in their life. So I'll explain it for like 30 seconds, right? So I go into the database and I pull everybody's birth date code. And the code said, the A's were between 70 and 80, the B's were between 60 and 70, the C's were between 50 and 60, and so on and so forth. So I go to my colleague and I say, does anybody know when we put these codes on the database? And my colleague said, nope. And it turned out they had been using the same age ranges for the past 10 years.
Wow.
So the 70 people were now 110,
Wow.
right? 70, yes, they were crazy. So the thing is you need to figure out what data you need and then how you're going to use it. So in the omnichannel world, right, if you're going to email folks, you need emails that are actually going to be delivered and opened. It's good that you have an email, but is it actually one that works, right? If you're going to do social and you're going to do social advertising, in social ads and things through digital, do you have a search engine optimization strategy? Like, so before you spend money on social ads, can people find you if they Google you, right? So those are the kind of things that you want to think of as you think about what channels does your omnichannel experience going to cover, and do you have the basics before you get to the fancy, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
That's a great point. Can we touch on data hygiene for a minute then? Because sometimes
Sure.
data hygiene can be really intimidating for organizations. They hear you and they go, oh, well, we have the same problem within our database. We can't do this. Don't let that be what prevents you from starting. One of the simple ways that you can go about updating your database is sending out a survey. And if you have a huge database, maybe you segment it, you could survey to start to collect additional information to make sure that their email is up to date, some interests, preferences that they might have. Many organizations are starting to collect race and ethnicity and other different data points. And you can do this via survey. Now, not everybody's going to respond to you, but those who do care about your organization. So you're going to have that data point as well. Richard, do you want to talk about some of the other things?
Yeah, so I think what's really interesting at Data Axle, we actually take in more than 2 trillion records a year. And we do, a majority of those records that we take in-house are for modeling, but are for data cleansing and appending, right? And so, at the end of the day, when folks are, to Kimberly's point, the bread box can still be a bread box. You don't have to boil the ocean in understanding what data you need for omnichannel. So, typically when I talk to clients, right, they're confused about what data is the most important to them, right? And what data needs to be updated, right? So, that's number one. Number two, data governance is pretty important and is pretty big in the space. Like, who owns a piece of data? How are we going to get it? How are we going to keep it up to date? How are we going to measure it? How are we going to use it? And so typically when I work with clients, I typically say to them, think about what are the top 5 things that everybody should have on every record in the database. And as you identify deeper affinities, more capacity, more stickiness to the organization, add additional data points, right? Because everybody's going to sort of deserve their major gift moment. But you can't keep, 500 data points on every single person, because that deluge of data may create more confusion.
Great point. And we'll talk a little bit more about essential versus aspirational data a little bit later on in this presentation.
So we're gonna move to sort of the role of data in an omnichannel strategy. What I'm going to show you sort of in the next few slides are some examples of additional data points or additional data sets that may help you with your program. And these come from Data Axle, but they are available in the marketplace from all over, right? So at Data Axle, we actually have a business file that's got more than 17 million US businesses. Why is business information really important? Well, what we know today from talking to clients is that they're working a lot on cause marketing. They're working a lot in corporate engagement. They're working a lot with workplace giving. And wouldn't it be helpful to identify those folks on your file, or the folks that you want to be on your file, where they work, to kind of warm them up for their workplace giving campaign, right? So there's an example of how do I use an additional data point to kind of further the cause, right? Another way to look at it on the consumer side of the house is, right, at Data Axle, we keep track of about 330 million US consumers, and I don't know, there's probably about 400 elements and 5,000 lifestyle segments. And this is where you want to be able to figure out what are the pieces of data that you need and how do they support the mission and the constituent journey, right? And picking out, the top 5. So is it, do I need an ethnicity, or do I want to know, do they pay their credit card bill off at the end of the month? And both of those data points are just as accessible as understanding, is an email address good enough, or do you have a cell phone? And then the last piece that I just kind of wanted to make sure that folks understood is that when we understand, we have 1 billion email addresses on file, you may only have one from your constituent. And so if you want to reach them on Facebook, you're going to want to know, what email have they signed up for Facebook with, right? For me, it's my Juno email from 19 years ago. But what email do I actually read my, I don't know, my J. Crew catalog, my New York Times updates, what's my Gmail associated with that, right? So one of the things that you want to be able to figure out is what email addresses do you have and how are folks using them, right? And that's also data that's accessible in the marketplace and has the ability to be stored and used within CRM systems. And I think the other thing, when we go back to Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, when you're doing your digital acquisition and your campaign work, you may only get a Twitter handle, or you may only get an email address, or you may say, I've got 1 million Twitter followers. Do I know who these people are? It is accessible, and you do have the ability to say, resolve an email address, a Twitter handle, a Facebook ID to a name and address, right? And that's a great way to understand acquisition. Do you have people on your house file that actually are following you on Twitter? Or do you have people on Twitter that aren't on your house file, and how can you convert them, right? All right, so then the question is right, what data do you have, Kimberly?
Yeah, and you made some great points. So as you look at the data that you have today, ask yourself, does it have that multi-channel reach? Is it deliverable? Are you able to track metrics on it? What metrics do you need? Because you're gonna, you'll want to have some insights. And then also really look at additional data that might be available to you through your CRM or your donor management system, your DMS platform, and then figure out, if you can't get it through your CRM platform, what outside sources can you use? You know, is data, you could get data Axle through Bonterra's channels, but you know, would data Axle be something that you could leverage so that you could optimize your campaigns and really add that, layer in that additional data so that you can better segment your audiences and go after that omni-channel approach?
So what we know, right, to Kimberly's point, right, it's like taking what you have and then supplementing it, right, with additional audiences. And what I will tell you is, right, acquisition, lapse reactivation, and house file renewal, all three of those things are really hard, right? And they're not getting any easier. So the question is how do you know, taking these outside data sets, understanding who are in your audiences and what channels do they participate in, right? And then engaging in the strategies for who's digital first, who's mail first, who's phone first, right? Who's face-to-face first, and then implementing those strategies. But I think the second part there is quantity is huge, right? So what we're finding with our clients today is that when they're looking at acquiring or reactivating folks, they're looking at modeling as a way to actually do and understand who in their lapsed and deeply lapsed file they can reactivate, and does it have a higher ROI from a lapsed reactivation gift is typically higher than a newly acquired, and how does that associate with, you know, sort of those leaky buckets? So think about understanding your audiences and then kind of following where they are and where they're going. So here we're going to talk about the metrics. So talk about some of the metrics, Kim.
Sure. So as we start to think about the essentials, there's really important data points that you're going to need. You're going to need the basic demographic information and attributes about a person. And then you're going to want to be thinking about the old timers RFM, right? Recency, frequency, monetary value, how recently they've given, how many times they've given, and what is the top dollar, what's the total dollar amount, and then what's that, you know, average gift that they're giving. Really helps you better segment your base. And then also, you know, the other data that's out there, like the number of click-throughs that they have. Sometimes looking at the types of information points that they're clicking through to look at the content, right? And, you know, you can see what you can do within your CRM or your DMS platform. You can also look and see what modeling can be done so that you can better understand, you know, who is ripe for an upgrade, who might be ripe for a certain type of communication. Do you want to add anything else to that, Richard?
I don't think so. I just have to say RFM is always my fallback, because if you at least have to know what constituents are doing to you before you can figure out anything else, right? It's like search engine optimization before, you know, display ads. But anyway, when you think about the nice to haves and aspirational, the first thing I always think about is a match back, right? Did my audience do what I wanted them to do? Right? And in omni-channel, it's really important to understand match back before you get the campaign started, because you're going to want to understand who's received emails, how do they receive those emails, and what did they do in those emails versus who got direct mail pieces and who responded to direct mail pieces, and how did gifts or engagement come back in. So that attribution thing is pretty golden, right? The second thing in the nice to have is, did I identify the right audiences? When you look at your activity across the board, right? Are the behaviors or the asks of what you want them to do actually working? And what we know is, right, once direct mail goes out the door, that's kind of all that happens. It's there, but we do know with digital advertising, with connected TV, with email campaigns, we can always change creative, do retargeting, change audiences, update audiences, and do more things with it. So being able to measure and identify, am I getting the right audience with the right creative at the right time is pretty important. And then I think the golden ticket, which I don't think anybody has undone yet, right, is the one-to-one attribution model. And I love this. We've got, let's be real, no one has a one-to-one model yet, right? And this is where, you know, in my old school fundraising, you know, the direct mail people typically weren't friends with the major gift officers. And then the direct mail people weren't friends with the email people, but now the email people and the direct mail people are friends, but the marketing people, not so much. So understanding the attribution model and being able to measure that on a regular basis is pretty important.
And when you say that, Richard, I mean, is it part of the organization's structure that needs work? So part of it is in the practices that you have just from an engagement strategy and omni-channel strategy, right? But the other part is the institutional culture of really looking at, you know, everybody, all these different departments have their goals. And as we look at it, you know, they're like, no, you can't touch my donor. That's my donor. What advice do you have for organizations who need to overcome some of the institutional cultural issues?
Yeah, I think in general, where I've seen a little bit of success and movement in the spaces, right, is giving folks qualitative and quantitative goals, right? So, you know, a quantitative goal would be, you know, cost per dollar raised or long-term value of the donor or cost per acquire or whatever it may be. A qualitative goal would be something like, how many people could we promote and move from channel X to channel Y? Or how many people can we promote from a mass marketing campaign strategy to a mid-market annual fund kind of strategy? And so if we reward folks and we measure other things besides those hard dollar pieces in, people will know what levers they need to sort of pull. That, you know, the overall pot of money, if it still comes in the door with a more satisfied donor, you probably see all boats rise.
Yeah. Love it.
All right, we're going to another poll. Jeanette or Kimberly?
Yeah. Do you consistently monitor your fundraising metrics during a campaign? Yes, no, not sure. And Jeanette is going to give us the response in a second.
Oh, there it is.
There it is. 61% say yes. Awesome. And those others, no judgment here. We know you're probably working towards it.
All right. And the follow-up question to that is,
if you do monitor, do you adjust accordingly? Do the insights that you attain as the campaign is going help you to optimize those campaigns that you're running? And again, that's a yes, no, unsure. And look, I've been, you know, a ED and a fundraiser at small, medium shops, and it can be really hard to track your metrics, right, during a campaign, and to have time to do that. And then it can also really be hard to pivot, right? But that's kind of where things are going today. Is a need to begin to layer in those insights that you can get as you're tracking all of it. I love seeing this, that 56% are saying, yeah, we optimize as we go, because it can be really helpful to just kind of squeeze out as much as you can from that campaign. Richard, what would you add?
I would say it's really important in this day and age to optimize and you go and monitor, because it's kind of the industry standard. Right? Yeah. Direct mail, not much you can do about making the caging facility open up the mail any faster than they are, but understanding where you are and when you're there helps you understand what kind of supplemental pieces you need to put in place. And I think this goes, Kimberly, you know, to some of this workflow automation stuff. Yes. I'm making adjustments.
Yeah. So before we hop into that, let's answer a question from Kelly, who asked, can you explain what the attribution model is?
I'm going to try very hard, Kelly, to do this. And Kimberly, when I zig and I should zag, you just say, Richard, zag a little bit.
I will. Okay.
So Kelly, an attribution model is almost like a matchback on steroids. Old school direct mail fundraising, we used to do something called a white mail matchback. We did it once a quarter. And what we used to do is we used to say, okay, let me take every donation that we've gotten from somebody that has no associated source code to it, and let me see if I sent them a piece of mail in the last 3 months. So did that piece of mail actually, can I attribute that gift to any of those outgoing sort of fundraising pieces? So we got fancy and we moved from matchback to attribution, because now not only are we matching back gifts to direct mail, we're actually looking at the Venn diagram of where does mail, social advertising, email, phone calls, and gifts, where do all of those things overlap? And can I actually figure out, did Richard seeing that direct TV spot about the animal, did that make him open up the envelope and put the piece of mail in there? Or did that email, make him go to the website and actually go through and give a gift? So that's what an attribution model is. It's basically a matchback on steroids.
Yeah, looking at all the different influencers to that actual action of making a gift. So let's talk a little bit about workflow automation. Omnichannel campaigns and marketing it's all about ensuring that your donors are given a cohesive messaging experience from your organization. And CRMs and donor management systems that have workflow automation can make it a lot easier for you to leverage the data that you already have in your database and then help you adjust your communication strategies with your donors in real time. So workflow automation can help you create those custom experiences for every single one of your donors based on their past behaviors. And it will help those supporters feel like they've gotten that personal touch. But it also gives you the flexibility to grow at scale. And so, it's going to help you generate those tailored responses. It's going to help you create connection and consistency in your communication. It's going to help you ensure that your outreach and your engagement is going to be relevant. It helps you send that right message at the right time, and it helps you guide your supporters into taking action. And it's also can be really easy because there are templates and workflow builders. I know that Bonterra's Every Action software has it. We also have Network for Good. And so you're able to leverage templates that will make it a little bit easier for you. It can be intimidating to start to build these out, and that's where those templates can really be helpful. And here's the other thing. You can then start to build off of that. Once you start to do it, then you can also work through creating those right custom experiences for donors based on their behaviors. And look, we all have to start somewhere. So that's the other thing to remember, is that this doesn't have to be a boil the ocean thing, as Richard used that analogy earlier. It really is about taking those incremental steps as you go and thinking, all right, what can we do right now that's tangible? And then what can we do, in a month? Or how can we build out something that allows growth and scalability, but isn't going to tax our entire team? So just food for thought around workflow automation. We're now going to move into omni-channel campaign execution and how you can really just sort of launch some really awesome campaigns and get some great insights.
Yeah. So the proof in the pudding, right? How are you going to gain a 360-degree view of your audience, right? How can you turn advocates into givers? How do you want to learn how to measure intent, the importance of modeling? And the 30-second story I'm going to tell you is I think organizations have been doing this for a long time in understanding the 360-degree view. The difference between today and maybe 15 or 20 years ago is you can actually gain that 360-degree view in a shorter time horizon or in a real, or in some cases real time, right? So, 20 years ago, I worked with an organization. They had a CRM system, they had an email system, they had a peer-to-peer system, they had an advocacy system. And guess what? None of those systems talked to one another. They were just hanging out there. And so every 3 years, they would do this thing called a, for lack of a better term, an inception analysis. And they would actually merge purge. Those people in direct mail know what that is. They put all that data into one data set, and they would see how many of those were overlapped between all of the systems and who had the earliest inception date. And from there, they would actually make decisions about acquisition and acquisition spend to figure out where they would get the most bang for their buck. So if you're in direct mail, you're used to going to a cooperative database, or you're used to renting or trading some lists and actually doing some modeling and figuring out, okay, I want to acquire these folks and I'm going to acquire them through whatever the channel is. That's good. Now, the thing that the inception analysis allows you to do is, maybe I don't want to get them with a first gift. Maybe I want them to get to sign a petition first. And so maybe it makes more sense to spend the money to acquire them on a petition signing and then convert them into a fundraising program. Or maybe it's, I want to acquire folks with a one-time gift and then bring them into a sustainer program, or I've had more success acquiring directly into a sustainer, right? And so the point around this is when you identify and understand your 360-degree view, what's your goal for your program, right? Are you looking to increase your response rates? Do you want more long-term donors? Are you looking to increase the number of donors? Do you want a bigger gift size? Do you want to, how do you want to increase your long-term value? And what we know is modeling in artificial intelligence, it works. As a recovering major gift officer, I would say no. The only thing that works is my head, because I'm a major gift officer and I know stuff. But when we're doing with mass marketing, right? You've got too many folks. We got to let the data scientists do their work. And it's not only about understanding your models for your acquisition file, but it's also about understanding and modeling your house file and those behaviors around there as well. Anything else I'm missing on here, Kimberly, before we get to the next slide? No.
You've got it.
All right. So, oops. I looked at too many papers. But anyway, the good news here is they put this really cute picture of the lion being fed this little cub. And the challenge here is, as you're identifying your 360-degree view and how folks are engaging, it's not only about the channel, but what they're engaging in. And you need to actually be able to nurture that and understand that on an ongoing basis, so that you understand where you want to keep putting names or people into your constituent journey and where they want to enter.
Yeah, agree. I mean, as you're thinking about this, the question is, who do you want to acquire in the future? What do you want your supporters to look like? Because you should be starting to nurture those relationships today. Those donors for 3, 5, 10 years, you can start to nurture those relationships today, and it is definitely worth the investment.
Yeah, and there's sort of the 3 steps, right? It's the awareness, right? CTV ads, your acquisition through direct mail, programmatic and display work, and then how do you actually shift that into interest and consideration into what an ask is, and then think about what the conversion channels are. And this is that idea of return on ad spend and cost to acquire the donor come together, right? And that's where your spreadsheet gets probably another few tabs or another few formulas. Kim's going to talk a little bit about TikTok, and I think this is actually an interesting example.
Yeah. So, as we think about our future audiences, we also have to think about which social channels we are on today. We know that the boomers and Generation X, are on Facebook. There are some millennials on Facebook, but there's also a lot of younger people who are actively on TikTok. And so there are large charities out there who are successfully on TikTok. We look at the Red Cross, and they give us some great examples of how to engage and leverage TikTok with success. But I talk to a lot of organizations who go, well, I'm not the Red Cross, like I'm small and we have a small shop. How are we going to do this? And really what I want to say is big or small, you got to give it a whirl, right? Like, and I'm not saying you have to give TikTok a whirl, but you have to think about what new channels you need to move into that will engage that next audience. You've got to be thinking about what kind of attribution model you're using and understand if this is really contributing to your fundraising strategy. And as we go to this slide here, this is an organization that I talk to. I have a podcast. It's called The Accidental Fundraiser. Please check it out. And I was talking with Nikki Miller, who's the development director there. It was her first year. She's definitely an accidental fundraiser, fell into it. And she was there and she's like, you know what, I want to reach another audience. So we're going to try TikTok. And I think there's like 9 or 10 staff people. They just all started it. They started posting videos. They all said, all right, well, we'll be in these. We have no fear here. She, laughed and said, I didn't really know what I was doing, but, I knew I could talk to some kids who know how to use TikTok and ask them some best practices. And from there, they've launched their TikTok channel and they've kept it going. And that's the whole thing, is they're engaging different audiences. The other thing that they do is they also support, as we think about community-centric fundraising and engagement, they also like to talk about, promote other organizations in their community. So it's another channel. Like, that's it, folks, like stepping into other channels so that you can reach new audiences. It could be within generations or not, but just giving it, the goal is to get out there and try and test and learn. And also remember one big thing, I always coach people around this. You may try something and it may not work. I mean, look, QR codes, QR codes were a big flop pre-COVID. Now we use QR codes, right? Think about that within your organization. You may try something, it may not work, but it might not have worked that day. It may not have worked at that time, but today is a new day and it might be worth trying again and reimagining.
And then just another little bit of a case study around sort of omni-channel engagement, right? We work with Save the Children, and they are spending a lot of money on digital acquisition. And as you probably are aware of, the least amount of data that you ask people to enter into your website, the better you're off, that your abandonment rate will stay lower. But then it was actually taking them 8 to 12 weeks to understand email address to who the name of the person was. And so what we did at Save the Children is we took a process that took them 8 to 12 weeks and we turned it into an hour. They send us their email addresses. We resolve it to name and address. We append demographics and Save the Children persona data to the name and address. And then we check their CRM system to understand, is this someone new to file, or is this somebody that has now reached out and said, here's a platform that I'm on that you may not have known of. So either they've enhanced the data that they already have about the person, or they've actually acquired someone new. And the big win here was they were able to actually monitor and understand their acquisition dollars in real time, as opposed to 12 weeks later, being able to understand, are they reacquiring the same people over and over again? And we have a few stats here. We were able to append more than 50% of data to the people who had written in, 9% names and addresses, and then 30% to get that physical address. So that's actually been a really big win from them. All right, the big finish, Kim.
Game changer, right? It's a game changer. So let's talk about some of the key takeaways here. they may seem obvious, but you have to figure out what's going to make it all work for you. And we want to make it very actionable. So part of it is being able to organize, append, and analyze the data that you have and really determine what additional data you need. You want to be able to put your constituents first by unifying your audience segments, and you want to be able to use those actionable insights derived from data to guide the channel. And remember, our donors are living in a consumer world today. So as Richard was saying, where it used to take 8 weeks to get data or be able to have some actionable insights, we as organizations need to be able to try to harvest data real time and use those insights to modify our campaigns, really understand what our donors, how our donors are behaving, what they might want to see from a content standpoint, and really be more responsive to them as we go. And when it comes to your channel selection, you really have to look at the data. You have to start with who your audience is, think about how they communicate with you, where do they spend their time? You can't operate anymore off of it being a gut feeling. It needs to be based on data. And it really is important to invest in these tools to make it easy to access, and then also really easy to see those insights that are coming and bubbling to the surface. Now, I often hear from organizations who say, but I don't have the budget. I'm really nervous about this. What I throw out to them and something to consider is beginning to advocate for an innovation fund. And if you're able to create a pool of funds that allow you to step outside of your boxes and really test and learn. And it's a safe space because it's called the Innovation Fund or whatever you want to, name it. But people can give to it, board members, or maybe, you will be able to successfully advocate for it within your organization. That gives you the safety to begin to try new things. And as you try new things, you're going to learn more, which will help you become successful as you go. So those are some of the key takeaways. Richard, is there anything you would add? And by the way, folks, please start to type in questions. We have a few more minutes, and we'd love to be able to hear your questions and address some of them.
I think that's good, and I think you make a really good point, right? Data, the deluge of data, the things that help you understand your audiences is what's going to help you drive revenue. Some of the things that were considered exotic, 2 or 3 years ago are not exotic anymore, right? So that's, that lesson number 1. And lesson number 2 around that is, to Kimberly's point, one test does not equal a pronouncement. You need to keep trying things over and over again because it's going to be based upon timing and how people are engaging. So, donor advised funds are really big right now because gas is $5 a gallon, and donor advised funds are already committed to charitable giving. So how do we unlock dollars that are already available when folks may not have as much disposable income, those kind of things. But I want to thank everybody for sort of hanging with us for the hour. I want to thank Kimberly for spending the hour with us. Next steps, we'll definitely make the recording available to you, and you'll see we're trying the QR codes. So we'll see if the QR codes work to get to us at Bonterra or at Data Axle. Kimberly,
and I believe that, I was just going to hop in. I was just going to note, I believe the QR codes link to additional resources around workflow automation and omni-channel communications and marketing. So please do check out those things. We have one question here. How many is too many channels to have, Richard? How do I gauge what I can handle?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, you need to really think about, are you doing each channel as best as you possibly can before you're adding something new, right? I think that's number 1. I think number 2 is you need to be able to test and think about what are the channels you're working on. People think, oh, if I do some digital ads, immediately the money is just going to start rolling in there. Well, that's not the case. I mean, a lot of these organizations like the Red Cross and Alzheimer's Association, all these different folks, they've all done this work to actually curate their digital audiences outside of fundraising. So there's lots of parts to it. So try and test and sort of create the universe. All right, it's 3:00. Jeanette, Kimberly, anything else we should tell these folks?
No, thank you. Go
right.
for it. Be brave.
Yes, and we're glad to meet you, and thank you folks for joining. I'm happy we had a lot of friends on the call today. So thank you. All right, see y'all out there.